and welcome to the Rental Realm, where transparency meets opportunity in the world of real estate investing. I'm your host, Nicole, traveling full-time in an RV, connecting with real estate agents and investors across the U.S. to give you an inside look at what's actually happening in our rental markets. From short-term to long-term rentals, we're uncovering the numbers behind these deals. Today, I have an awesome friend in, Amie. We actually met in San Diego when neither of us were in real estate, and she was a real estate investor at that point, but that's when I was actually a gym owner. So it's been super cool over the past, I guess, 5 or 6 years now to see your transformation and what you've accomplished over these past few years. So Amie, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. This is super fun.
I'm super excited to talk about, because I don't even actually really know how you got started in real estate. So I'm pumped to actually hear your story and everything that you've done over the past few years. But if you would start off just telling everyone actually how you got started in real estate.
Yeah. So it started in San Diego, actually. I rented a duplex, like it was the side-by-side duplex, really cute part of San Diego. And my landlords lived right next door. Now, what we know is house hacking, right? But they were like a very well-to-do couple. But they were living in a 2-1 and just in University Heights. Really cute part of San Diego. And the more I got to talk, I think it was 2012 maybe. And I sort of got to talking to them and I looked out, I was like, oh God, this place is so cute. I love where we live. I don't know if we could ever afford to actually purchase something in San Diego. Like that would be crazy. My now husband and I were just dating, just boyfriend and girlfriend. And I looked up on Redfin, I think the price of the house that we were living in. I'm like, what I pay in rent would probably cover most of the mortgage here. That's pretty smart. And I got to talking to them. They're both real estate agents and long-time investors, had been house hacking for multiple units over the years, but also he was a flipper. And I think that they had like 30 rental units at that time, made it through the crash and everything like that. And they were like, dude, you could absolutely do this. Like, this is not that hard, we'll help you. Like, all right, cool. They recommended a lender and we got qualified and started looking for house hacks, before it was called house hacking. But yeah, I was like, oh, this is awesome. And it was just it's so much fun to go, as like when you go look at houses with your friends, essentially, like it's just so much fun to go like look for this new thing and see what's possible and then run the numbers. And he taught me a lot about, actually, the reason we bought the house that we did was because of the agent. Because I was like, our first place was in North Park in San Diego, which blew up right after we bought.
Such a great place to be. Oh my God.
So I think we bought that in like 2013, maybe 2014, something like that, like right around then. And it was definitely still gentrifying, especially where we were. But it was a 2-1 in the front and a 1-1 in the back. And I was like loosely running the numbers with my landlord. And I was like, I don't think that this works because that back unit would probably only get like 900, 1050. And he's like, no, I just bought a triplex up the street and I'm getting 1600 for the 1-1s. I was like, seriously? So it made me like shift and like run the numbers differently. I was like, well, this then makes sense. And we could live in the 2-1 in the front. Ended up buying that. Yeah, that was kind of the beginning of our journey. So we did the long-term rent thing. We got $1,650 for it. So it's a standalone house, like a little casita. Had its own washer, dryer, AC-ish, like ability to plug in units, which in San Diego sometimes is a luxury.
That's what you get.
Yeah, exactly. And it had its own yard. So they had like dogs and we were dog friendly. Year goes by, tenants are buying their own place. They move out. And I had been talking to one of my girlfriends about short-term rentals. And she's like, oh, we Airbnb our house when we travel. Like, that's interesting. I was like, I wouldn't really think that where we live would be that sexy because we're not by the beach. It's the city. It was super rough, but it wasn't like a super fancy area either. Like North Park is hipster and gritty and whatnot, or it was. Now it's like even nicer than it was by the time we sold. But I started looking into Airbnbs and I was like, man, this solves a lot of like tenant issues where you're like, if I don't like you, you're out in a week or you're out in a couple of days, like life goes on. And I started looking around and we were like one of the more, like there was good comps and stuff like that for it. And then I ran the numbers. I was like, this is really interesting. We could cover our whole mortgage if we did this. And that's when we started renting out that unit on Airbnb. So I think we got into Airbnb like 2015. So very early days.
You were definitely one of the first people I know that got into Airbnb, which, God, I guess that's 10 years ago almost at this point, which is terrifying. But at the same time, you were one of the first I ever knew. And you were actually one of my inspirations for getting into real estate because we talked about it in San Diego lightly. And that was before in San Diego, I was like, I have no ability to afford anything here. My goal was to afford a mobile home in San Diego. And that was literally the most I was going to be capable of getting. And you guys pretty quickly, right before COVID, I guess. Or did you guys move the year before COVID?
Literally. Like, I think we actually got COVID right before we moved. So we left San Diego 2019, like December of 2019 is when we closed on our house here in St. Pete. Like right before everything went nuts, just everywhere, basically, we moved.
And you have, I feel like, almost perfectly timed the market for as good as someone, not that you've necessarily tried and been like, oh, this is the right time, like I'm going to buy here strategically, but it's just, it goes to show of like, if you do time it right, which you can't plan, you couldn't have projected that Florida was going to go insane like it did at that point. But you guys have almost perfectly timed it for leaving San Diego, going to Florida. And tell everyone where you are at in Florida and just a little bit about the market that you're at there and actually your journey of getting into real estate even more while still working a full-time job and opening another business. So tell everyone a little bit about that.
We had, continued to buy when we lived in San Diego, ended up having a place here in Fort Lauderdale, which is where I had lived before I had moved to San Diego. We had a vacation rental in Wilton Manors, Fort Lauderdale area. And I think every time we came to visit, it got to be like, this house cost us $395,000 and it's way bigger than anything we live in San Diego. And like the lifestyle is the same, right? Like you have city, you have like a melting pot of people, you have warmth, you have tropical, like everything about it was like good. I was like, I think it's time to go. You know what I mean? Like San Diego was getting even more expensive than it was when we moved out there. And just traffic was a nightmare. Trying to go to the beach, which is like the one thing I really like to do, is like hard. Everything's just difficult. So it's time to go. So we were like decided on St. Petersburg, Florida, which was a compromise between my husband and myself because I wanted to move back to Fort Lauderdale. But I think it's a little too East Coast vibes for him. Like he's very much a Midwestern boy, as you know. So he liked St. Pete a lot. So we moved to St. Pete, found a place here that worked with an agent who we came out, looked at stuff for a weekend. And I think he just like kind of got a sense of like what we liked and what we were looking for and found this place, which was in a really nice neighborhood. We have a nice size yard. We have like a half acre. We're close to the water, but not in a flood zone at all, or X500 or whatever you want to say. But yes, we're in St. Pete and just decided to put down roots here and have been in this same house, this is a stretch because we are house hackers like AF. So we've been here for coming up on 5 years in the same house, which is still kind of like unbelievable because we used to move like every year.
Yeah, you guys were like, and it hasn't felt like 5 years.
I know. It's so weird to think that we've been here for 5 years, but yeah, we've been here for 5 years in the same house. Granted, we've done a lot to this house. So I think he thinks he's keeping me busy, keeping me from buying more house hacks.
You've been pretty busy, I would say, over the past few years. And even at that property, if you want to talk about the ADU, I've been lucky enough to actually see that house and it's awesome and was such a cool idea of, in Florida, you don't see a lot of ADUs. So that was one of the first I've seen. And you guys built that from the ground up. So it wasn't something that was already there. But talk a little bit about that and how that's done as a short-term rental.
Yeah, I feel like San Diego had a ton of like casitas, ADUs, or some sort of like mother-in-law suite. Like that wasn't uncommon in the city, I feel like. Maybe because it was older. Because in St. Pete, in the older areas, like historical Northeast, there are a decent amount of these are the big houses and they have like a carriage house or a guest house or whatever. But yeah, not a ton of ADUs in the rest of the city in the newer construction. So the city freed up, similar to how San Diego did it or most of California did it, where they're like, hey, St. Pete is a peninsula on a peninsula. So we're very dense and we need to free up some housing. So they allowed people to build ADUs. Technically, mine's a pool house. So it's not its own residence.
Is it really?
Yeah. So it's technically like another room in my house, which works out because then we got an easier permit. We didn't have to do like a separate meter, all that. It runs off of our electricity. But we decided, I always loved having a rental unit or having like some sort of like helper unit. And it's just nice to have a space for guests and whatever. Because again, you live in Florida. Even when we lived in San Diego, people want to visit. So it was nice. So we started that process and we're like, okay, because I was like, well, instead of building, like this is going to be a pain in the ass guys, like, why don't we'll sell our place and like if we find something else that would actually fit our buy box, right? With, ADU or guest house, decent size yard, pool, decent size house, and semi-updated. Like, we can do some updating, but I didn't want to like totally do a full remodel. Yeah, everything had like a point in it. So it was like 1.5, 1.7, like, shit, we were never finding anything that we want to. Rather, like, it's just going to be so exorbitantly expensive, it might not be worth it. So we looked at building the ADU. And we did a cash out refi to do that. The house had gone up enough that we could pull out the funds to build that unit. New construction's hard. Like, it's no joke. I thought remodeling was difficult. New construction is on its own level, that's for sure. And maybe like my contractor had something to do with that too. But I'm very happy we did it at the end of the day. And it does very well. We rent that out on Airbnb, and we're legally allowed to do so because it is technically a room in our house. So it falls under home sharing in the city of St. Pete, which normally you would have to do at least a 30-day minimum rental. But because we're here, no one's going to throw parties or cause a ruckus or whatever, and it is not impactful to our neighbors. But we do a mix of short and midterm on that one, actually. We have like a local lady who likes to stay here. She's very mold sensitive in Florida. We have a lot of like just regular mold. Like, it's because it's just moist and warm all the time. And that being a new build has like no mold, basically. Like, she's like, I just feel so good here. So she comes and stays with us, and she's awesome. And she's like super easy to have. So she'll stay with us for like a month at a time. It's actually coming back today.
So funny.
Yeah,
I love that.
yeah.
You never know what you're going to get for, like, I never would have expected a local person to be staying with you guys just because she experiences mold in other places. But that makes sense. A lot of the houses we've seen together where it's like, going to have to be struggling with that. And one of them actively trying to make sure that's all good. But that's super cool. I didn't know that it wasn't technically an ADU, but a pool house. And that's a great way to get around the regulations there, though, because St. Pete is really hard. I mean, tell me more about the regulations, because I'm not familiar. You've pushed me up a little bit more north, which is great. I love that area. But what's St. Pete like if someone is trying to get short-term rental there?
So it's very hit and miss. And there's certain websites that you can go and look on to see, because there's areas of this St. Pete, which would look like they're within the city limits. There's like little pockets that are still unincorporated. So you're not actually under the regulations of the city of St. Pete. But if you are in the city of St. Pete, it's a 30-day minimum rental. They do actively track that type of thing. So they don't play around. But if it's home sharing, like, you can still always rent a room in your house. And then Pinellas County, city by city in Pinellas County is different. So you really have to know the regulations locally before you start looking, because a lot of agents just kind of blow it off and they're like, oh, I want to sell a house. Like, oh, don't. If you're looking for a short-term rental, like, St. Pete would be hard to do, just because like you're probably going to get caught and the city actively will be tracking you.
This is where working with an agent that really knows their stuff, though, because even for me, when I've been looking at properties over there for investors, I immediately partner up with you because Tampa has its own 7-day rules. Clearwater is pretty much no-go. St. Pete is very hit or miss. What's the other one right below Palm Harbor?
Largo's okay, but you have to, Dunedin's a hell no. They like actively, like more than any city, I think, in Pinellas County, they will find you. You can't even do home sharing. Like, you can't even rent out a room in your house. Yeah, it's wild. It sucks because it's such a cool city. Like, it's so cute.
It's adorable there.
I know. I love Dunedin. I mean, so there are commercial zones, but that's different, right? Like, then you're not in a residential area. That is a straight up commercial zone. Very different. And then Largo, you can do it, but you have to have inspections. I mean, it's not overly oppressive, but Largo, you have to have like a hardwired alarm system, fire alarms, and then it has to be inspected for safety and whatnot. They're not terrible on it, but it is like something that you have to do. Seminole City, no. Seminole unincorporated, it falls under the unincorporated Pinellas County. So that's that nightly rental, super, like we were talking about before the call, super easy to get permission to rent there. But yeah, and then the beaches, surprisingly, St. Pete Beach, no. Madera, no, unless you're in a commercial zone, because they're so tight together. Like, yeah, you really have to be careful.
It's hard if you're not from the area. And even if you are from the area, but you're not familiar with all the regulations, I guess Indian Rocks Beach, are they still allowing it, or if they tightened down? Because I think that was one of the only areas, right?
Yeah.
Wow.
Indian Rocks and Indian Shores both allow it. Indian Rocks tightened, but it's still not overly onerous in my opinion. If you had a giant house, people are like, they don't want parking everywhere. They don't want like people sleeping 3 to a room. I get that too. They don't want people parking on their neighbors' lawns or garbage everywhere. Like, I feel like it's reasonable, but there is some things that were like a little goofy, I thought. But I think that there's challenges being brought up against it as well. So we'll see. But I feel like most beaches everywhere allow short-term rentals. Like, vacation is going to be a huge driving factor for your local economy. I don't totally understand why. I get it that it's always been like a local area and whatnot, but you'd think that because so many people do come here for holiday, you think that they'd be more open to it. I don't get it.
I guess maybe since there's so many people that come down for more midterm stays and all the snowbirds, I feel like that's always kind of been around. So maybe they just have enough of a tourist boost with snowbirds down in that area. And I do understand of like, it's getting to the point where if you have a short-term rental at every other house, it takes away from the area. And Indian Rocks Beach is so cute, but it's a small market. So when you are having people trying to sleep 3 people a room and there's no parking now anywhere on the street, that was a really cool little pocket. But I figured, I was like, that was only, I think, a year or 2 ago, we were talking about that market and how it was easier to get into, where I figured at this point they were already making it more strict. But what places in your local market are you seeing if someone was wanting to kind of get into short-term rentals? What area would you recommend that makes sense still for trying to cash flow on a property?
Personally, I'm super risk adverse. So I like things that have multiple exit strategies. I prefer something that has like, okay, if this doesn't work, I can absolutely still long-term or mid-term rent it. I think there's spots in Largo that still make sense. I mean, we've seen like the places in Palm Harbor do really well. I think just for their proximity to Dunedin and Clearwater, that goes really well. And then I think up north, there's some opportunity in like the Pasco County area. I don't know it as well, but I feel like the price point is good. And then you're also looking at people who are going to the springs and stuff like that. So like you have beaches up there, but then also you get that like spring traffic. So like the Weeki Wachee, I'm going to go look at the manatees or go out scalloping, that sort of thing, I think is kind of interesting. But I think always I would prefer the metro sort of Tampa markets as well, just because you're always going to have people coming. We always have people moving here. I mean, half the time with my midterms that are here, I get, hey, I'm moving to the area. I just need some place to crash until we can buy our house or find our permanent place. Like I get that all the time. So I probably look at, small multi, an area that you could also short-term rental is what I would all day.
I think that's a great strategy. And I love that. I didn't realize that pretty much everything you've done is like a little bit of house hacking to an extent, but makes a ton of sense if you're trying to get into it, especially as a new investor. And I love that you've continued over the years, even though I know you guys could afford to not be doing that, but you're also able to grow your portfolio, and would love to hear a little bit about what's your actual portfolio look like right now.
Yeah. So we have obviously our ADU that I talked about. We have a small multi that's not too far from my own house. And that one I use as a midterm rental because that is in the city of St. Pete. It does very nicely. I bought that literally 2020. And then I have a house in Largo that we used as a short-term rental for a while. I think we've talked about this one because I just don't have the time to like really manage a short-term rental that's like 20 minutes from my house, like running back and forth. Anything that popped up, I was like, I just don't have time for this right now. Like I stepped up a lot in my W-2. My scope of work has expanded there. I can't do it. So I converted that to like mid and long-term. And that's actually been going well. Like finally the guests kind of calmed down a little bit. This poor woman. Okay. So this family like had gotten flooded out. They were not too far from us, Largo. They had gotten flooded out and she was just running on like super high anxiety, as you can imagine. But I mean, I got so many calls. I love the fact that like people look at you as an authority figure on some level, but like I'm making it up as I go along. Like she called me and she's like right before Milton hit this, they got flooded out in Helene. She moved in. She called me before Milton. She's like, what are you doing? Are you evacuating? I'm like, no, like, she's like, you think I should evacuate? I was like, I don't know. Talk to the authorities. I mean, like, that's so sweet. But at the same time, I'm like, I do not have answers for your life, So it's just being a landlord's hilarious, but she's kind of calmed down. I think they're good now. She's been super chill, but yeah, it's like, hey, Amie, light bulbs out. I'm like, fix it, put a light bulb in, dude. Like, yeah, like I was like, I cannot handle your life. Yeah, I can't like tell you what to do or like, anything. But that house has been so amazing. It's 1,600 square feet block house, never lost power. No flooding, no damage. Like, yeah, like the tenants who were in there during Helene and then Milton were like, yeah, the lights flickered a little bit. We stayed on. Like, they never lost power. I was like, can I move in?
I know, because you guys even lost power for a long time, right?
Oh, for a week. It was terrible. So we have that Largo property. We sold one down in St. Pete in the Pink Streets. God, because they flooded really bad, I think. We didn't sell it because we were worried about flooding, but we just sold it because it was time. So we have the Largo house. We have one in Missouri that is a second home that my husband's father lives in currently. That's a whole other situation. I think that's it. I'm considering getting back on the buying trade. I just haven't found anything that I really loved. You know what I mean?
It's hard to find things that are cash flowing that well. Yeah. And you guys are starting a business at this point, which is amazing. And it's a little off topic, but would love for you to just lightly explain that and what you're actually doing there, because I think it's going to be an amazing thing in that area.
Yeah, super excited. We're starting, I hate the phrase adult daycare, but that's usually what people know it as. So we're starting an adult daycare for seniors suffering from isolation or people who are going through, maybe dealing with a dementia diagnosis or some other form of hey, they need some help during the day. Maybe they can't function in society and their caregivers need a break. And so we're starting that. We are rounding the corner on finally finishing all the construction there, which is awesome. But yeah, so that's definitely taken my focus. And as such, I've not sold a ton this year. I haven't really pursued trying to be a very busy real estate agent. But yeah, I think part of me is definitely intrigued with Northern Pinellas County right now, just in general. To your point, about predicting the market or whatever, I just go with my gut a lot on things, and my gut feels good about Safety Harbor, Dunedin, Palm Harbor right now. I don't know.
Your gut's been telling you well, so I would listen to it.
My antennas popped up and I'm So I'm keeping my eye on the market up there. And if something amazing popped up and I was in the right spot for it, then I would absolutely take that. We might actually sell that Largo house. I don't know. Our partners, unfortunately, are going through a divorce. We had partners on that one. So chances are, there will be a sale of some sort, whether it gets transferred to one of them or the other, and then we exit, or I don't know. We'll see what happens there. But chances are I'll have some 1031 opportunities. So that's the gist. God, we've bought and sold a lot of properties over the years. The one in Wilton. We also house hacked at Triplex in Normal Heights in San Diego. Actually bought our big kid house in San Diego before we decided to move. It was not a house hack, was not anything. But I kind of forgot. Honestly, I don't know. Yeah.
You wish you would have held on to that one?
Yeah, on some level. Although our mortgage payment house in San Diego was on a nice spot. And so it was our payment was high and we did rent it out. It's a lot to think about. Well, what if tenant doesn't pay this month? What the hell are we going to do? And it's that's a big payment. And then we had a decent sized payment on this house too. So
San Diego is not quite as friendly to landlords.
No. And especially during COVID, I was oh my God. She was a really nice lady, but things happen. If she had not paid to feed her family or something like that, we're in a tricky position then.
There were a lot of people in California doing that. We knew people personally that were yeah, I can't afford. I think most of us packed up and left for people we had at our gym. The people that have been there their whole lives stayed, but pretty much all of us that were transplants from other places, most of us left because I don't think you can afford it if
you're not working. If you can't work, what are you going to do? And she owned restaurants.
Oh God.
Yeah. That was always in the back of my mind is it would be legitimate if she couldn't pay. She wouldn't not pay because she didn't feel like it. She was literally she might have been hurting real bad at some point. And I was I would love to get out of this situation. So honestly, if I had one takeaway, it'd be if you can, keep everything. 1031, if you're okay, this is time to go. I feel I've achieved what I need to here. But honestly, I look back at a lot of our places, and granted, when we sold the place in North Park, it was time for us to take the money out of that place. We needed it. You know what I mean? To continue to grow and whatever. We literally sold it. And then a lady who I sold it to sold it 3 years later, because we kept in touch. I loved her. We kept in touch and she sold it for $400K more than we sold it to her for. Yeah.
That's insane. But that's San Diego. It's not even surprising. It's just what it was in that market.
But it's like, you know what I mean? Like, holy crap, you know? I guess they're having a little bit of a retraction, but it also went up a lot during the pandemic too. So
for sure. And I mean, even the house you're in right now, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that doubled in 2 or 3 years.
Yeah, if not more, honestly.
What you guys got it for. So from like end of 2019 to 2022, I think when we talked and we got to see your place, you're like, yeah, it's pretty much doubled, which is insane. Where do we see that in 2-year periods? But you guys just got in at a perfect time. And I'm sure it's still continuing to appreciate at this point in time.
St. Pete's like such a cool city too. I think that they did a study recently. I can't remember who, but they found that it sucks because like a lot of locals are of course like feeling the pinch because prices have gone up a lot, but people that are moving in are mostly like 6-figure earners, I guess. So like while the population might not be like exploding, and God knows we really have nowhere to put people if it does, but like, cause it's a cool city, right? Like St. Pete's neat. It actually reminds me a lot of San Diego. The people who are moving in are all 6-figure earners, I guess, like very high income people. I see a lot of California plates still, which is funny. So yeah, I think that like while it's gone up a lot, the people who are moving in can afford it. And that's why we're like holding stable, maybe seeing a slight retraction, but it's not like, oh God, no, you know, we're going to have falling prices. It's like, no, people can afford to live here. It's crazy though.
And the people that have been there forever, I see that on the East Coast more too, of just so many people that have been there most of their lives are going more up north or out of state because they can't afford the changes in insurance, and the property taxes are now killing them, where they're like, all right, time to go. I can't afford to live here, even though I've lived here for 20 years, which is sad to see, but just how real estate goes when you're in a popular market. And that's even in places like West Palm Beach, where it's not as crazy built, but then you're right across from Palm Beach. So that area does go a little crazy with the millionaires and billionaires that are living over there. So
right. They can really afford it.
Yeah, that's their second house.
Yeah, my second mansion. It is interesting. And we did just pass an amendment that will, I'm trying to remember if it's a Pinellas County amendment or if it was actually statewide, where they're going to inflation adjust the tax adjustments. So I don't know what the math is though, but it did pass to say, hey, inflation's been crazy. Of course, my house has gone up a lot. Like, when you're adjusting the taxes, like we have to take into account some sort of inflation factor so people aren't getting hammered as much as they have been. We've been very lucky. I mean, so our insurance has gone up here, but again, we're not in a flood zone. We're not a newer build either. But when we bought here, it was like $1,650 a year or something like that, which was nuts. Yeah, crazy.
That's super low compared to what
a lot of people have. I mean, now I think it's up to $3,000 a year. So like, yes, it's doubled, but also that's not terrible.
No, compared to what we've seen at like some of the places that we've got quotes on, I'm like, that's really good.
Honestly, like overall, like that ain't bad. So my dad's always like, how much is your property insurance? I'm like, he's like, oh, it's like not that far off from what mine is. I'm like, I don't know why. It's just not bad. I think, you know, we have done a lot of improvements to the house, but also like just not being in a flood zone is huge for keeping your expenses down.
I never really thought about it too much before this year. I feel like with the hurricanes, like it was always something you knew the hurricanes were going to happen. But I feel like now more than ever, especially with getting whacked twice in 2 weeks in October, would you recommend people that are looking in the area just hardcore stay out of flood zones at this point? Or do you think it's okay to still be looking at stuff that might be in one?
I mean, my agent tried to tell me otherwise. I would avoid a flood zone unless you're elevated. Like, you know, your one client's place, it's elevated, like no living space on the bottom. You're going to be okay, right? That being said, what I think people don't take into account, and they absolutely should, is that you have evacuation zones as well. That's important. So think about the stress of like, okay, so we'll never flood here. Maybe we're very unlikely to flood here. It has to be a 100-year storm to do it. But you still might have to be forcibly evacuate. Like that's the stress, especially if you have young kids or whatever your situation is, or maybe an aging parent who isn't easy to transport. What does that look like for you? So I would take all those into account when you're looking at your tolerance for a flood zone. I mean, but that being said, who wouldn't want a house on the water or overlooking the water?
It's a fine balance though in Florida now, because you want to be as close as possible. If you're looking at a short-term rental, that's the one question we get asked multiple times a week, even though it's in the listing, of how close are you to the beach. So it's like you want to be as close as possible. And that was even when these two storms hit in Palm Harbor. We were one street away from being in Zone D, which wasn't getting evacuated, versus being in Zone C, which was getting evacuated. And we had the guest saying, can we stay? And we're like, no, you're in an evacuation. And they're like, well, it's right across the street from this place. And that's something easy, I guess, to find online. I don't think it's only during storm times that they're posting that.
It's Know Your Zone, I think. Just you can go Know Your Zone Florida, type in the address, and it'll tell you exactly what your evacuation zone is. And then flood maps are super easy to find. They're on the FEMA website. Again, it's like a GIS search. So you just type in the address and it tells you what zone you're in. So it's just something to take into consideration. Like I was thinking about buying a house in a flood zone at some point too, because I was like, we don't ever really get hit. Like it's not that big of a deal. And now it's like, oh, I don't know. I guess the hardest part, especially as an investor, is like it's a variable, right? Like if you're like, okay, the numbers work today. My flood insurance is $7,000 a year, but hey, I have really good numbers. This is going to work. But like, what happens if they go up to 12 and it's 12K? I don't know. It's just a variable. Again, with me being like very risk adverse. And this is why like I've never really gotten into flipping or anything like that. I've house hacked because it's like, that is safe. You can put 5% down. You live there. And you know what I mean? Like, I think I'm just super risk adverse. I think that's what it comes down to, is just the mental side of it. I guess technically all of Florida is in a flood zone, but like we're not in we're in an X500 zone. It would take a 500-year storm to reach us. We're half a mile to the water. We're half a mile to the bay. I can be in Treasure Island in 3 miles to get there to the beach. I would try to find something that like is like not where I am, because you can't do 30-day rental. It'd be a 30-day minimum, but I would look at areas because there's tons of them, Largo, High, and Dry, and there's a lot that's very close to the water. My former short-term rental is 5 miles to Indian Rocks Beach. And there's clearly neighborhoods that are closer than that are still out of a evac zone or flood zone. So Seminole, same thing. Palm Harbor, same thing, out of like the flood zone. So even like, I'm very intrigued, I've told you a zillion times, with also the Space Coast and like that Melbourne Beach area, because you can I'm sure they're evac, but you can get properties on the barrier island that are in an X500 zone.
I'll have to look more into that market. I have one girl I'm going to talk to soon that she's over in that area, because that's something that you've brought up over the past year where I'm like, it's a good place to look, and the prices are still much more reasonable compared to a lot of other cities in Florida now.
So if that was something where I was a retiree or I was someone who worked remote, like all I wanted to do was live by the beach, that would be 100% a place that I would look. Plus, there's a lot going on with Space Force and just in general, like SpaceX is doing launches over there. You have like a decent, I think, aerospace presence over there. So there are jobs and it's a decent sized city. And I think as the influx continues to expand, I think that that'll be an area that people will tend towards as well. Then you're close to St. Augustine and Jacksonville. Like it's not that far. You're super close to Orlando, an hour and a half or something like that. I think that megalopolis of Tampa, Orlando, Jacksonville, or Tampa, Orlando, like Space Coast in general, it continues to fill in.
For sure. I think it's just going to keep blowing up. At this point, from Fort Lauderdale all the way up to almost Port St. Lucie has grown tremendously. So
isn't that crazy? Like Jupiter was like the sticks back when I lived in Fort Lauderdale. Juneau. Oh, you're a fisherman? Are you a commercial fisherman? You live in Jupiter or you live whatever?
And now so expensive.
I know. It's crazy, right? And it's just all filled in. It's the same thing. Yeah. I think it's going to be the same thing. As you follow the commercial developers, one of my favorite real estate economists is Logan Motoshami. And he says these home builders don't build to lose money. So if you follow where they're building, that gives you a good idea of like where they think people are moving or they know people are moving. You know what I mean? So as you see the developments fill in, like that's probably where.
That's been one of my favorite things about traveling in the RV is we're seeing these places where we're driving through and I'm like, we are in the middle of nowhere and there's 10 different new home developments. I'm like, what is going on here? Like, I don't understand, but that's a great point. And these are filled up too. Like we're in San Angelo right now and these houses, in my mind, we always try to guess, like, what's the price going to be here? Because to us, we're like, this is not close to anything. You're 3 hours from Dallas, 3 hours from Austin. And the new houses here are still $400,000, which they're a decent size, but still, like, in my mind, we're like, 300s, like low 300s. And then we're looking at the prices and they're like mid fours. We're like, okay, I guess this is a more popular market than we expected it to be. In Florida, the same thing. When we would drive back coast to coast, every time we're driving through those small towns and there's communities of these new homes, we're like, who the heck is living out here? But there are people that are.
It's wild. Yeah. And it's not just retirees anymore. That's the crazy thing. It's young families. There's just so much more industry, I think, here. A lot of businesses have moved over the years. And I think that that's what's sort of informing a lot of this. I actually saw a video today. I watched another real estate agent. He's a broker. His content, I love it. He's very data driven and he's very analytical. I think he was a former finance guy. So his stuff is really like from that bent. And he's been doing like a lot of like new construction and like content. And one of the areas that I thought also was very interesting might be, I don't know if it'd be short-term rental worthy just yet, because it's definitely a little bit sketch in areas, but Palmetto, which is right south of St. Pete, it's right off the Skyway. So it's like if you were working in St. Pete, you could be there. You could be from Palmetto to St. Pete in 20 minutes or so.
That's a close drive in reality.
Yeah. Not bad. And they're doing a ton of new construction down there. And I was like, damn it, I knew it. You know, I go to those moments, you're like, but they're all reasonable price points though. It's really interesting to see like the affordable housing, like they're doing like townhomes and like some new builds for like in the high twos, which is like insane for new construction too. Yeah. It's like Palmetto and then you have Bradenton and then you have Sarasota, right? So just kind of interesting to see, I think what will happen with those areas over the next couple.
Something to look into for sure.
Yeah, for sure. If you're an appreciation buyer, you know what I mean?
Yeah. And would love to hear a little bit about one of your favorite properties, kind of breaking down the numbers. It can be any of the properties you've had, but what's one of the numbers that you've had of like, what are the actual expenses that went into it and how much were you guys cash flowing at the end of the day?
Yeah. So I think our little small multi over here that's like maybe 10 minutes from where I live right now is probably one of the better deals I've done. It's not sexy. It didn't pull my heartstrings when I saw it. Like sometimes you see those properties, you're like, I just love it. It's not one of those. It's tiny. It's like 1,050 square feet. It's tiny. It has a 2-bedroom and 1 bath in front and a 1-1 in the back with little screened-in patio. So they sit front to back. The yards are disconnected. So like people have privacy for themselves. I bought it for $263 in 2020. And it's in like a B type of neighborhood, like older people and like younger people, like very blue collar, working class, but like safe. I would feel comfortable living there. And I do that as a midterm rental and it does nicely. It's to the front. And I do this because I'm lazy though, too. I don't worry about wringing every last drop of cash flow out of this place, but my mortgage is like $1,550 right now. Front house, I get like $1,950 in low season. So front house is like $1,950 to like $2,400 to $2,550, just depending on like the timing. Like usually I'll raise the rent. Like if someone's in there for 6 months, I'll probably raise it a little bit for high season, but I'm not going to like turn the screws on them or anything like that. But yeah, so it's $1,950 for the front house. And then I'll get $1,450 up to $1,750 for that back unit.
That's amazing.
Yeah. I've done nothing to it. No, that's not true. I painted recently the interior. That's it.
I love it.
So like I painted the interior. I got like furniture on Facebook Marketplace. Obviously I got new beds because like that's one thing I just won't do is like anything, a mattress I'm not buying. Not buying a used mattress. Personally, no judgment to anyone who is. There's just nothing crazy. Like I didn't go nuts on the decorating. Like it's cute, but it's like not fancy and it just cash flows very nicely. I have internet and I pay for the electric. And because it's a little block house, it doesn't take a lot, you know? I mean, maybe my expenses are $300 a month, including water and then like lawn service. Cause I also don't want to do that. So I pay someone to take care of like the postage stamp lawn that I have there. And that's about it. Like we had some damage to the fence with the storm, but you know, that's life as a landlord anywhere, right? Like there's going to be something that pops up. But
on the low end though, I mean, that sounds like you're at least getting on the low end $1,500 pretty much a month with a midterm rental, which like we've talked about this over and over again, where short-term rentals, it's getting way harder to get that. And part of that is also just that you bought it at a great time. I'm sure, how much is that one valued at? at this point, just a few years later?
That one, I think right now we could get like $399 easy for,
Okay. That one hasn't went up as tremendously, but
No, but I think I bought it in like April 2020. So, or maybe 2021. So it was like the pandemic had like definitely started in, there was like, it was bidding wars for everything. I literally went $1,000 over asking for that one and locked it up. I asked for nothing from them, but it was like all ready to go. Like the roof was fairly newer. Oh no, there's a portion of flat roof. So they had to replace the flat roof, but like they had to do that anyway for like anyone who would have bought it to get insurance. That was about it. It was just a super easy transaction. And yeah, I think that area, I don't know why it's overlooked, but it is. And it's still like one of the one places that's still semi-affordable in St. Pete, I think. That's like not in a rough area. You know what I mean?
And what area is that? Or what neighborhood?
I would say it's like the Tyrone area of St. Pete. Yeah, so like Tyrone Mall area is generally like that sort of.
That sounds great. I mean, it would eat away at the cash flow more now for the price that would currently be valued at. But again, you didn't have to put much into it. So if someone did go into that area, and I guess it would be a little harder because it is midterm rentals in that neighborhood too. But if you made it really cute and had some extra amenities there.
I think honestly, if you were house hacking it, I think you could easily do the back house or the front house as a short-term rental though. You know what I mean? If you live there, I think that you could get away with technically calling it a home sharing. 'Cause I think that's technically a mother-in-law.
You got all the cool properties.
That one has been very like just easy. You know what I mean? It's like, I don't know. Like at some point I probably will sell it in 1031 into something else. But for now, it's just been really nice. And yeah, to have like a little, like it's appreciated a decent amount, but cash flows well.
That's awesome. If it's easy and it cash flows well, I mean, that's pretty much the most you can ask for at this part of time. So love that. And when you are searching for your next property for yourself or for your clients, since I don't think we hit on it much, but you are also a real estate agent on top of everything that you're doing, what are you actually looking at, or what metrics are you looking to hit, and how are you analyzing the deals?
Yeah, for me, big time. So for a client, it's a different story, right? They all have their own things that they care about, whether that's cash flow, whether that's appreciation, whether that's, hey, I just want a little bit of help with my mortgage and I want to live in a nice place or something like that. Personally, at this point in my life, I really invest for appreciation. It's like, yeah, it's cool to make money off of, my little duplex over there, but I rarely take the money out of it. It's not something that like I depend on, but every sale I've made has made us like a lot of money, and it's all been from appreciation. I just honestly look for appreciation at this point. You know what I mean? Like, I don't want to hassle. I don't want to invest in a rough area. I don't want to have to fight every freaking day with my tenants or anything like that. I just want appreciation.
Now, when you first started investing, were you looking more so at cash flow than appreciation, or was that sort of always your strategy?
No, I definitely without cash flow. I mean, I guess at first with our very first house hack, it was like, oh, how much can we get our mortgage down by? Because I have to live here anyway. Like if I can pay less in rent and mortgage than I do in rent, hey, that's a win. You know what I mean? And then I was like, oh, at some point I did think like, hey, it'd be really nice to just live off cash flow. And then, an AC blows or something crazy happens or you have a backup. And then it's like, oh, cool. I just had to jet my sewer pipe for $1,000. There goes your cash flow, especially for lower cash flowing properties, right? Like if you're making $200 a month, that's 5 months of rent just for something small. But the tax advantages, that saved us a lot of money too, is the tax side of things. And then, yeah, just the appreciation over time. I think that this past 10 to 15 years has been an insane run up in value. But I think at the same time, you're going to see appreciation coupled with just, hey, debt pay down because someone else is paying down your mortgage. I think it's a really good wealth preservation strategy as well. Just a hedge against inflation. So I would absolutely look at, like, what I want to do is just buy properties that I can hold on to and then sell at some point. Honestly, what I'm looking to do right now, and I think I might do for the next property, is something that I could just break even on, and something that my husband and I would want to live in retirement. Like, hey, we're going to sell this house, which is, we'll just take that money. And I mean, like, we have other retirement. No, I don't want to get emails like, why are you investing? Like, yes, I have 401k and all that stuff. But, I think that it'd be nice to be like, hey, cash out and then live in a property that maybe is a smaller footprint, that we don't have to like all the yard and all the maintenance and stuff like that, just something. One of my other friends is looking and they want a townhouse or something that's semi new build and that's walkable and all that stuff. And I think that that's great too. You know, like I think that there's going to be, especially after getting hit with hurricanes, right? Like new build, block build, not in a flood zone. There's a lot to be said for a lot of that. My hairdresser was like, why did we buy this? She got flooded, I guess, really bad twice.
Oh, no.
And I was like, dude, where are you? I thought she was a little bit north of, she's like, no, I can see the Skyway from my house, which if you're not from St. Pete, the Skyway is a bridge that goes over the water. It's terrifying. It's a terrifying bridge. It's like really scary. It's a suspension bridge. But she's like, why the hell did we buy this house? And she's like, I've just been so like freaking out about it. I think a lot of people are kind of having that moment where they're like, I do not want to mess with this anymore. So I think long term, those newer construction houses and those non-flood zone houses are going to be really, really, I think that they'll probably appreciate more than flood zone houses.
Because the location and being close to the beach is something that's hard to beat. But when insurance is also not being the most helpful when the situations are happening and seeming to happen more frequent now too, that's a whole nother thing you have to be thinking about. And if you're willing to go move into someone else's house for 6 months, we've had a lot of people reaching out of looking to stay for 3 to 6 months because their house got flooded these last 2 storms. So I totally agree on that. We're going to see a lot more of that.
And with the insurance prices going up and whatnot, I mean, I've heard of people getting new construction like fairly close to the beach and like their insurance is nothing. And people forget that that's a big factor in your insurance prices too, right? Like age of the roof, how your roof is secured, the type of construction you have, like all of that goes into your total cost. Like I'm in a stick build house. That's probably why part of my insurance has gone up over the years, right? The guest house is concrete, but that's part of the picture too. So when you're like, should I spend more like a newer construction? That all comes into play, right? Like just running your numbers and being like, wow, my insurance might be way lower and stay lower, right? Like it might not go up a lot. I don't know.
And having hurricane windows and all of those little details.
All of that, impact windows and stuff. Yes. Strapped roofs, that sort of thing. Like all of the newer codes that have come out since the hurricanes. I think it was 2004 when they updated the codes. I'd have to look again. Maybe it was later than that. Anything built after that will have like, totally different insurance bill than most of us would.
And I feel like it's hard. The houses, at least we've looked at together, it's like you don't see a lot of new builds, it feels like, in these areas because it was already so built up. And so it's harder to find those. It's not as easy to find as you might think, depending where you live locally. It's like you can find in Texas a lot of new builds in a lot of these places.
Sure, you can Florida, go out.
Yep.
When the land's expensive. Yeah, when the land's expensive, it's like you're not going to buy a house in Pinellas for $600K and knock it down. Maybe you could, but you have to be extremely wealthy, right? But like a developer isn't going to buy, like that's not attractive to build a one-off, for the most part. It's tough.
And just to wrap this up a little bit now, what is one piece of advice you'd give to investors that are looking to start investing? What is one thing you wish you knew when you got started?
I would say house hack and then hold as long as you can. I sold over the years and part of me was like, man, knowing what I know now, I would have held on, to a lot of them. There's definitely things I'm like, I'm glad we didn't hold on to, but my gosh, when you think about like the appreciation that's happened, and even you think this is probably the top of the market. And like, while you don't want to get out per se, like again, with the timing the market thing, like sometimes it's like, okay, it's time to go. Like we're moving and I don't want to keep a bunch of houses where I can't manage them, but like really appreciation / debt pay down from someone else. Very attractive.
At this point, I know we are at the top where a lot of us are like, how much higher can it go? In another 20 years, I don't think we're going to see that much less than. I wish that we would stay where we are now, but in the reality of things, it's never stayed constant. We're not going to see prices. We might see them go back down for a little bit, but over the next 10 years, the next 20 years, your house is going to probably double again at some point, just because that's how the world's going to keep going on and inflation's not going away. So
we target inflation at like 3%, I think, as a nation, right? 2 to 3%. So take that alone. Like say your asset goes up like 2 to 3% a year and you have debt pay down. So even if you bought, let's say, property for $500,000-$600,000 today, I'm not going to do public math on the 2 to 3% appreciation, but say someone else is paying down the mortgage. So in 30 years, you have a $600,000 asset. So you broke even on it for 30 years. Okay.
When you go to retire.
Yeah. When you go to retire, you have a $600,000 asset plus whatever the math I didn't want to do is, on the 2 to 3% a year.
I'm definitely not doing the math. You are much more the math person, the engineer in the house.
But you know what I mean? Like that's a significant amount of money. And even if the little bit of cash flow went into expenses and whatnot over the years, and fixes and whatever.
I think the most impressive thing that you've done is you've been a real estate investor and have always continued to work. Both you and your husband have continued to work your W-2 jobs. And I feel like a lot of new investors are wanting to buy 3 to 5 properties and live off that, which with everything we've just talked about, that's really hard to do now. If you need to get the AC replaced or your roof replaced, like for a lot of these places, that's going to be your cash flow for the whole year. And if you're just banking on 3 to 5 houses to cover your stuff for you and your family, not going to be a pretty picture when one thing happens. So I don't know how you've done it, but I love that you've continued to work your W-2 while getting your real estate license, while starting a new business, while being a real estate investor and self-managing all your own properties. So very impressive, and something I think for people that I've never really had a W-2 job. So I wish I would have done that now and had something where I could have worked on it on top of everything else. But I think for people that are wanting to get into real estate investing and are not as willing to take a risk, like if you can stay in your W-2 job while you're investing, and if it's something like you where you can manage all of it, do it. And you're going to be in such a better spot when it's actually time to retire.
And I mean, I would also then say like, hey, yes, if your W-2 job is demanding, call, someone like yourself and get the property manager, screw the cash flow, keep the asset. You know what I mean? Like, I think that there is a lot to be said for diversification, and your W-2 plus your side hustles or your real estate investing, whatever you're up to, is absolutely part of that picture, So yeah, if we put that house in Largo back to a short-term rental, things work out, we do keep it. Like I will be calling you because I do not want to do it. I don't have the bandwidth, but like, yeah, what you're looking at appreciation here, over cash flow. I think I would be so stressed to try to live on my cash flow. Because you're right, like one little mishap and you're like, oh crap, and my car broke down or something like that. Like it just takes one little life thing to really. So I guess the other piece of advice would be have more working capital than you think you need.
1,000%. Because I've seen so many people that are getting into real estate investing now, and just it takes one little thing and they are out of cash, having to sell quick. Storm comes by and eats away all the savings that they had for the property. So definitely have more saved than you might expect.
Yeah, I've definitely scraped by on a lot of things in the past, and it has been incredibly stressful, hard on my relationship, like all of the things. And it's like, don't do that to yourself, like have more working capital than you think you need. And then your life will be just like so much more stress-free. Yeah, like I said, just house hack, put the 5% down and then have a decent chunk of savings and enjoy your life and enjoy not paying as much in rent, for mortgages you would in rent. Like that's just a very easy way to go about things.
You make it look graceful. You guys do a great job with it, but I know it's not always like that behind the scenes. Well, Amie, thank you so much. It was awesome having you on. And if someone wanted to reach out, what is the best way to contact you?
So it's Amie, AMIE, sells TPA, as in Tampa, amiesellstpa @gmail.com.
Awesome. Well, again, thank you so much and have an awesome rest of your Sunday.
Thanks, you too. Bye.